Okay, welcome everyone, and welcome to our special guest, Anthony Barrila. It was about 7 years ago that Anthony began his own recovery, and soon after began giving back to those seeking their recovery from addiction. And he's been doing that for several years now. Anthony's originally from Connecticut, but joins us today from California, where he assists in helping others who find their way to the Runway Recovery in Orange County. Welcome, Anthony. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your time, and we always love a story of hope. So we're excited to hear about your journey if you're ready to share.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, everybody. I'm really happy to be doing this. I've gotten the opportunity to do this type of thing a few times, although it's been a couple years in a formal way like this. But given the context of the group, I really like to kind of talk about my journey and how it affected my family. Um, and hopefully end given what you just said about a message of hope, to get to the part of how things are now. And just because there are some heavy parts of the story, one of the first things I do want to say is I have the most amazing relationship with my family today, with my mother, with my stepfather, with my little brother, with my grandmother, all people that are big, really big part of my story that I'll obviously get to tell you all a little bit about. So like Sue said, I grew up in Connecticut, nice town, little suburban town. From a very young age, I guess I would say, and actually a good friend of mine had said this once, and it always stuck with me. Felt like everybody out there, we look at all people, everybody or most people were given a guidebook to life that just taught them how to be, how to exist in social situations, how to balance work and school and fun and relationships and all that stuff. And people like us who end up in the rooms of AA and through this journey, we feel like we didn't get that book. Um, and when I heard that, it made a lot of sense to me. And I always think back to my life where, for the most part, and there's some things that I'll obviously share, but for the most part, it seemed like things were really good. I did have a great family, really good people around me. But again, from a very young age, I felt different. I felt out of place. I was never really comfortable in my own skin. Um, so my family dynamic, my mother and my father both had me relatively young. My father was 21, my mom was 20, and they split up about a year and a half after I was born or so. And then from that point on, my mom had pretty much full custody over me, although I did see my father most weekends. Most weekends I would see him and go stay with him. He was still living with my grandparents, and they were a really big part of my life as well. They lived in the same town. And then I also had a stepfather that my mother started dating when I was 3, and they're still married. He's still in my life today. But for the majority of my childhood until I was about 14, I was also an only child until my mother and my stepfather had a kid. So to kind of fast forward a bit until I was around 13, 14 is the first time that I wouldn't necessarily say the first time I had any minor mood altering substance. I might have had a drink at a family party or something like that before, but it was about 14 the first time that my brain created the connection between I'm uncomfortable in normal life, and when I have this drink, suddenly all my social inhibitions and insecurities have gone away, and I feel like, okay, I'm here. I've arrived. I can be how I think everybody else is. And from that point, it was really off to the races for me. And I I just knew I was unhappy before, and after I had that drink, I felt happy. I felt like I had new friends. I felt like I was accepted. A lot of this stuff wasn't really true, but it was what was going on in my head at the time. Um, going through high school, I definitely experienced um, some, I'd say, negative correlations with my use, where my use just progressed and progressed and progressed. I was partying all weekends, started, doing some other drugs like marijuana and stuff like that, and experimenting with other things. And while this was happening, um, my schoolwork and I was always very active in sports and football and track and field and baseball, and all of that stuff started to take a back seat. And all the normal things we see with somebody who is putting drugs and things like that and alcohol in front of what the priorities are supposed to be. So all that was really continuing for me, all through high school. I just by the end of it, I just narrowly graduated from high school, and at that point, this is when things kind of started to take a pretty deep turn for me. And I think it's really relevant for the context in this conversation too. My um, all my friends at that time, again, I came from a good town, good school. A lot of my friends that I'd party with and stuff like that and play sports with, they were all going to college. And because I just narrowly graduated high school, I just made it into the local community college. And that's when things really took a big change, because now all the somewhat good influences, or, middle of the road influences that I had in my life were gone. And I was becoming a townie. So now, even at 18 years old, I'm going to the local bars and stuff like that, and just the gap between me and everybody else just really started to grow again. So at this point, it's really, I didn't really recognize it at the time, but it's really easy to notice that you know that sense I had in my mind that the drink is what was making me happy and giving me everything that I thought I wanted. It really started to work against me at that time. And a big part of my story really starts to come into play here, and that's my relationship with my father. So my dad was definitely an addict, definitely an alcoholic, not a daily user type, not specifically addicted to anything physically, but he certainly struggled with substances his entire life. And at this time when I'm 18, 19, 20, and a lot of my friends are going or gone off to school, stuff like that, my father really became like my best friend. And, they say misery loves company, but we didn't see it that way at the time. I just saw, I looked up to my dad in so many ways, because despite all those other problems, he was just an amazing person. The life of the party. Everybody in town called him the mayor, because he just, everybody loved him. And he was kind of the martyr type that would never do much to progress his own life, but he would, if he had a shirt on, he'd give it to anybody that was in need. Um, so it was around this time as well that I really started getting into harder drugs and stuff like that. I knew a lot of people that were doing pain pills and stuff like that, and I would still say at this time I was not physically addicted to anything, and I maintained some very slight level of balance. I was still kind of going to school, although not doing well, and working jobs, but you know the type of jobs I was working were below my capabilities. So really just stagnant in a lot of ways. I was living with my mother mostly, although I'd stay with my grandparents a lot, because they were. And I'm sure a lot of people know this kind of situation, but my grandparents, for both myself and my father, really were the enablers in the situation. They were, the most amazing people, but they didn't uh, they didn't excel with setting boundaries and really talking about tough things and stuff like that. But my physical addiction, and when things really started to get bad, started when I was 21. I went in to get what you'd call a routine wisdom tooth surgery, and I later found out that the oral surgeon is not somebody that would have come highly recommended from any other dentist or surgeon. And I had a really rough surgery getting the wisdom teeth removed, really tough extraction, but I got through it and everything. But about 24 hours later, I was at work and I started getting this horrible pain in my abdomen. I didn't know what it was, and I ended up going to having to go to the hospital, and I was terrible pain. And they did an MRI or an X-ray, I can't remember which one, and they found it was an MRI. They found, and I remember they came in, they didn't know what happened. They said, we found a large 10 centimeter tear in your intestine, and we don't know what happened or what's going on. Later, they found out it was because I swallowed a tooth, or a part of my tooth from the wisdom tooth extraction, and it tore open my intestines. So where this is relevant, again, I'm somebody who's not doing too well in life, but I'm not physically addicted to anything, and basically the result of that was I was given a Dilaudid, which is basically morphine 10 times as strong, prescription, and said that I'm going to be bedridden for 2 months while this heals. So coming out of that, um, I was absolutely physically addicted, and that's what really, at that point, where drugs were just the focus of my life, alcohol was the focus of my life. At that point, it was everything to me. I didn't have any. I felt like all choice or anything like that had been removed from me at that point, and the next year, 2 years was just a very steep, slippery slope into much worse things. My disease progressed into heroin due to money, running out of money, things like that, and it got really bad pretty quick. Um, Now, through all this, my father, I started to notice that anytime he would find out that I was doing a new drug or something or progressed into something else, I'd find out that, oh, he does that too. Um, so he was actually the first person that I ever did heroin with. And again, it was strange from the way I looked at it. He wasn't somebody that was physically addicted. He wasn't somebody that you'd look at and think, oh, this guy does drugs like that. Nobody would have thought. Um, and things just kept getting worse and worse. And finally, I was about 22 years old, and I ran out of money again, and had previously gotten kicked out of my parents' house, which I didn't see as or my mom's house, which I didn't see as I saw it as a bad thing. I freaked out in the moment, but it just, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But anyways, I had come to my dad first, and it was strange going to my father, who I used with, and said, "Hey, this is actually out of control for me, and I need help." And strange because, again, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, he was the type of martyr that he would do anything for anybody else, but not for himself. And, when I came to him and told him that, he was all love and all, let's get this under control. Let's figure this out. What do you need? And, I did the same thing to my mom. And I think this is kind of relevant for this situation, just from talking with people that might have loved ones that are struggling or have struggled or are in recovery now, is, um, and I just talked to somebody about this the other day. The support I got from my mom and my stepfather when I told them that I'm an addict and I need help was incredible, and also for me unexpected. So again, I previously been kicked out of my house because they found everything and all that, but I remember showing up and I was so nervous and I was shaking and about to tell them for the first time, I need help. And I remember my stepfather looked at me and he smiled and he goes, sorry for my language. He says, yeah, no shit, we know. And he chuckled and he laughed like that. And he said, now what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? And they supported me getting into treatment. Now, I wish I could say this is where my story starts to get better, but it's not. It's where it starts to get really bad. I went to treatment, and I was the example of somebody that within about 3 days of treatment, I thought I was, or a little more than that. I finished the detox, so 7 days, and then I said, okay, I'm cured. I'm not actually an addict. I feel fine now. I'm not physically addicted, so I need to get out of here. And I'd call my mom every day for about a week and say, I'm not like these people. I'm not as bad as them. I don't need to be here. And she'd say, "You're exactly where you need to be. Stay put." And she'd either hang up on me or she'd be silent on the other end of the phone while I complained and tried to manipulate her. But surprisingly, she was very good at holding the boundaries, and it never worked. Now, the alternative there, when I knew I wasn't going to get what I wanted from her, was I got myself kicked out of the program. I stopped participating. I just, I said, okay, I'll do this myself. And I knew that if I got myself kicked out, then my father, he wouldn't just let me, be on the street up there. So when I was getting kicked out, I called him. He came and picked me up. And another crazy part of the story here is him and I celebrated by going to the bar that night, saying, "Congratulations, Anthony's not a heroin addict anymore." And that's just that's how we were, and it seemed normal. And even I got a lot of amazing people on my dad's side of the family, aunts and uncles, and even to them. I was going to family parties right after and stuff like that and drinking. They said, "Of course, Anthony's still going to drink. He just can't do that other stuff." Um, they were all, again, all really amazing people. They just didn't understand. And a lot of people just didn't understand that for me, it was, alcohol and any amount or any mind or mood altering substance is just going to take right back to the other thing. Um, so a couple weeks after I had gotten out of treatment that first time, I started using opiates again, heroin really quickly. And there was a first night. I was heading out to the bar to meet my dad, and he um, I remember he was mad at me because I told him, "Hey, like I'm doing this stuff again. Like let's go get some." And he was mad at me, but he was like, "Okay, let's do it. Let's do it." And to fast forward a couple hours, obviously we picked up stuff we used, and uh, just to drop like a you know really heavy part of the story here. That night, a couple weeks after my first treatment episode, my father died of an overdose, and we were together at my grandparents' house when it happened. Um, so this was like world shattering for me. For the sake of time here, I didn't get into too much detail, but obviously, his and I's relationship was just, we were. He was my best friend, so that was a lot for me. And to fast forward, the next year or two, I was in and out of treatment, but just I had no real drive. I don't know if I was too sad. I don't know if I was unwilling to process. I don't know if at that point I didn't want it. I had this horrible thing that I perceived that happened to me, to us, and I just couldn't see, nor did I want a path out. Um, but again, I was in and out of treatment through the whole thing. Um, Again, so a couple years go by. I got out of treatment. This is like my fifth or sixth one, and right back to the same crap. Didn't do anything different. Back home, that's an important thing. Every time I got out of these treatment episodes, I went back home. The one time my mom was not good with setting boundaries was after the completion of a 30-day program. As long as I accepted doing an IOP, like an outpatient program, she'd always let me come back and live at home. And time again, it was weeks, maybe a month before I was back to the same stuff. Um, so now we're in 2016 Easter. I left my family's Easter party, and about 10 seconds away from my mother's house, I crashed into a tree going about 80. And this is the time when I finally put my hands up and said, "Okay, I don't care. I'm not going to come up with my own ideas anymore. I'm going to do whatever it takes." And through that, the next week there, I was able to find a place called Treehouse Recovery in Costa Mesa, California. I got on a flight. I came out here, and I've been sober ever since. Um, One of the biggest things that helped me in that period of time was um, I didn't put any timeline on my recovery. I didn't put any expectations, and I didn't. I was willing, and a therapist helped me greatly with this. Is I was willing to say I am not going to hold on to any preconceived notions of what I think it means to be a healthy, happy Anthony. Um, I remember one of the things I said to my therapist at Treehouse a couple of weeks into the program. He was asking me, why do I want to get sober? What do I want to do with my life? All that kind of stuff. And I was talking about, I was supposed to go to school to be an engineer like my grandfather was. And my grandfather, he was my biggest role model in my life, such an amazing man. I, um, I said all this stuff, and I remember my therapist, and again, excuse me for for my language here, but he he told me, Anthony, that's all amazing. That's really good stuff. But and take this for what it's worth. Are you willing to believe that everything you think you know about being a healthy, happy you might be complete bullshit? And I kind of I recoiled to that, and a little bit of me wanted to fight back and say, well, what do you mean? This is amazing. Like, I'm going to be like, this is all good stuff. Why would you say that? But what he did for me there is he got me to understand that I really can be a blank canvas, and um, I can do whatever I want to do as long as I put my recovery first and stay here and focus and just see what happens. And that's what happened. I focused. I took a major interest in the program. I took an interest in the other people that were coming in and wanting to help them. Something that, despite everything I said, I learned from my father to help out and take care of the people around you. And if somebody's struggling, take care of them and focus on them. That is something I learned from him. Um, and I think it was towards the completion of that program that I didn't talk to the rest of my family a lot through all this, because I finally understood that all these times that I called them while I was in treatment, I was just feeding them false hope. I was giving them a lot of, oh my God, I'm so good right now, but what's going to happen when I leave? Um, and instead, I focused on where I was and what I was doing, and very close to the end of that program, I kind of had what, to me, I think was one of the first parts of my spiritual awakening, which was, I was sitting there, I was talking to some of the other guys in the house, and all at once, I could see a picture of my life, and it was, me working in recovery and working, for that treatment center, which I really wanted to do, and I did for a while after. And I thought I'd be so fulfilled and so happy, and I thought if I could make my whole life about this and also turn it into a profession as well, then I'd have things sorted out. And to some degree, I was right. To a big degree, I was right. Because ever since then, I've made so much of my life about this disease, about recovery from this disease. I Within the next 6 months to a year after I got out of that program, I reestablished a relationship with my family, with my mom, with my stepfather, with my brother, and in a really healthy, productive way. I was able to pick up the phone and call them and not ask for anything, just sincerely want to talk to them. And um, I don't know what this is, but as I had said, my father was like my best friend through my whole disease until he passed. My mother's become like my best friend in my recovery, and all the things that I valued in myself back then from my father, and some which I still do, I've begun to see so many similarities in me and my mother, and been able to appreciate and learn and understand all the stuff that I got from her, being a young mother that worked so hard, waiting tables and everything, while putting herself through school to be able to take care of me and then my brother down the line when he was born. Um, I Just a little picture of what my life looks like today is I again, I still live in California. I still work for treatment centers. Some of you know Vecchi through his video or other things. He's an amazing friend of mine. He was the first person that hired me to do what I do at Treehouse Recovery. And now, 5 years later, after working at some other places and starting my own treatment center for a period of time, now I'm back working with Vecchi at a place called the Runway, which is a detox and residential treatment program here in California. And it's just so much of my life revolves around this stuff now, and it's not it's in part because I thought it would be good and necessary, but mostly now it's not. It doesn't feel like a need. It just feels like this is who I am now. um, I work an AA program. I have a home group. I have a sponsor. I sponsor other guys. I tend to sponsor guys that go through that treehouse recovery program just because I know what they're doing, and I just have a big connection, and I feel like a lot of the people that go there are people that, have really reached the end of the road. And I find so many similarities. I'm engaged today. I met a woman 4 years ago who is also in the program. I wasn't seeking out to date somebody that was in the program, but when we met, just all the similarities and stuff, it's as I say some of this just to iron out the fact that so much of my life is about this, and I couldn't imagine it any other way today. Um, my every relationship that I've had that was good and valuable with my family has since been restored, and it's just so amazing to be able um, to have those relationships today. And when I pick up the phone to call somebody, have it not be, "Hey, I'm in trouble," or "Hey, I need this," or "Hey, I need that," but "Hey, how are you doing?" Um, and yeah, I'm so grateful. I think I'm about reaching the time here before we should get into questions or whatever comes next. But again, thank you all so much. I love any questions, and I'm just really happy to get to share a little bit of my story with all of you.
Thank you, Anthony. That was awesome. And I have a dozen questions, but while everyone else gets ready to type theirs, let me just ask you quickly. You talked about your recovery at home in Connecticut. Do you think the difference was shipping out?
So I've thought long and hard about that, and I honestly believe that it wasn't it wasn't so much of the geographical change that did it, although it was definitely a big part, and I can't question it because that is what worked for me. But more so, I really think it was the internal aspect of being okay and being willing to leave, and the being willing to focus somewhere and not rush back. I know that was essential. Um, and I don't know how you can have one or the other. Sometimes I think about that with people that come into treatment or I sponsor or just have contact with that don't have that option, that need to be somewhere close to home for whatever reason. And with them, I notice a couple things. I say, okay, is this somebody who's truly and honestly open to doing whatever they have to do, but they just can't for whatever reason? And in a situation like that, I feel that the same outcome can happen even if they're close to home. But again, I don't want to question it too much. And I think it's really important that if somebody has the means to leave and remove themselves to be in a different location, that they absolutely should. That's what I think.
So, but at the end of the day, it's really commitment anyway, right? I
Yeah,
suppose. So,
absolutely.
all right. Anybody going to type any questions in here for Anthony? Um, how are you, while we're waiting still, it took my breath away when you talked about your dad.
Mhm.
How how is that now when you talk about it now?
Yeah. I'm happy you asked me that because it's such a one of the most beautiful parts of my recovery is centered around that, believe it or not. And just tell a very quick, and I'll keep it as quickly as I can here, story about that. So, um, obviously, right after that happened for the first couple of years, I used that as a reason to keep hurting myself and keep getting worse and worse and stay in my disease. When I got to Treehouse Recovery and went through that program, I learned through the therapy there and everything that I don't need to have this thing, this what I perceived as the worst thing that's ever, worst, my bottom, I guess you could say, even though I didn't get sober right after. Um, I I did the work to make sure that that wasn't going to be something that was going to keep hurting me. But that was only half the battle. The most beautiful part of it, and the beautiful part of it, it's weird to say it like that, but I honestly believe that it's everything's happened for a reason. The way I look at it now is about a year into me working at Treehouse, another person came into that program who went through almost an identical situation. And I didn't do anything crazy. I wasn't a therapist there or a clinician. I had a very different role. Um, but I spent some time with that guy and I talked to him. And the only thing I said that I remember saying when I spoke to him was, I know what you went through, and I went through something. I went through basically the identical thing. And I'm not sure exactly how, but the people here helped me. And that's no longer a reason that I hurt myself. And I've gotten past it and I've come to peace with it. And that person is still sober. That person's now still sober for about 5 years, and he has helped hundreds, if not a thousand, other guys. And the way I see the world and choose to see the world today is my father died so I could help him, so he could help X, Y, and Z people after him. And so, as weird as it sounds, It happened for a reason. I am totally at peace with it. Although not to say I don't miss my father dearly and wish he was still alive and
Of
around and
course,
I could share, but
of course.
I'm at
Yeah, it was
peace with
just
it.
not a part of when you were telling the story, just unexpected. So it kind of
Mhm.
took my breath away. I
Yeah.
just felt for you. Okay, so we have a couple. Mary wanted to know what city Treehouse is in. So before we tell you what city Treehouse is in, we want you to know that Anthony works for the Runway Recovery, which is in Orange County.
Santa Ana.
Yeah.
Yep. Orange County.
Okay. Yeah. Treehouse has three locations, though, just so you know. They're in
Mhm.
Costa Mesa, North Carolina, I guess,
Yep. And
and
Portland.
Oregon.
Mhm.
Yeah. So. And then Anne has a question. Anne wants to know, do you think your loved one needs to be begging for help? My son will go to detox when he runs out of drugs and money, then he relapses again.
Yeah. So that's always such a tricky thing, and I've never been able to look at and say like, what is that thing in somebody when you know that this time they're going to do everything it takes. And I sometimes it has to do, and I have these conversations with family on the phone that are looking to get their child or even spouse or family member of any kind into treatment at the Runway. And sometimes these are people that are wanting to are willing to do cash payment for treatment and pay for the whole thing. So it's not about that, but it's whenever I hear somebody and they're talking about that and spending money and using resources, I change the conversation a little bit and start talking about, just getting deeper and what's going on, and have they experienced any type of bottom? And that means something different for everybody, but it's so case by case. But um, if somebody's in a cycle of just going into detox and then coming out and then just going in, and they've never been they've never been allowed to experience the consequences of their actions, then they might need to experience some of that stuff. And again, it's so hard to speak generally, but um, never experiencing the consequences of somebody's actions, it definitely could be a reason to not take the process seriously and to be in the trap that I was in, where I'd get into detox and then say, "Okay, you see, I'm fine. Let me get out. I can go." I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay, and Mary says, your story reminds me exactly of my 27-year-old son. Is there a recording of this I can send to him? So, Mary, we will upload this to YouTube. You'll be able to share it from there, and you'll know when that happens because it'll get posted in all the groups. So you'll be able to see it there and then share it from YouTube. Nancy says, thank you for sharing your amazing journey with us. My daughter has been in a treatment center for almost a year, has 2 months left. She's on MAT. The rooms of AA and NA tell her she's not sober. What are your thoughts on MAT? Ugh.
Yeah, it's that's a tricky thing. I mean, I've gone through many different through working in this field and then through my own recovery of being on it, not being on it. This time in recovery, that's worked for me. I was not on it outside of the detox. Um, but I've gone through so many different evolutions with this. I think, well, to very specifically answer that, I think that she should ignore, to the best of her ability, what people in the rooms of AA and NA are telling her regarding that. That's not for them to be concerned with. Um, not to say that's necessarily going to help, but there's a different path for everyone. And if that's essential for her at this point in things, then she needs to keep doing that. The only thing I put in there is, I think long term, and long term is also a subjective statement. I think everybody should explore the path of replacing that with more lifestyle things. Our brain is an amazing pharmacy in itself that can do so much if we tap into it through exercise and different things. But I don't think that. I don't agree, to keep it really easy. I don't agree with the people in AA or NA that say that. That's just for her and her therapist and her doctor, and the people that love and support her to discuss and figure out what's the right time and what's the right path.
Okay. And Anne followed up saying that her son finished at 30 days in treatment, does that over and over, goes to sober living and then relapses, and she thinks he needs more structure.
Mhm.
So you want to speak about structure
Yeah,
briefly?
yeah, of course. That can be a very loose term and mean different things to different people. Structure for me in the beginning in my process meant being in a program with people that I know have my back in terms of keeping each other accountable for as long as I can um, I can manage, or as long as whoever's supporting that person through that can manage. For me, like again, and I don't mean to speak so much about a specific program, but it's my specific story, so I kind of have to. Is when I went through Treehouse, I was in that program in a sober living. It is a sober living, but it's a little bit different as well. I was there for 5 months, and most of our support came from the other people, not even so much the staff. So some people would say that's not as structured because we don't have a staff member with us 24/7. But for me, the way I look at it, that place was more structured than any other because the people that were there wanted it. And, another person, another peer of mine that's positive and supportive is going to do so much more than a staff member that's positive and supportive because it's just the way it is. I can't explain that other than it is. But, if they're doing a 30-day program and then going to a sober living, one thing I would definitely advise is that, um, they're also, and I don't know if this is the case, but they're also doing a full continuum of care. So when they first leave the residential, there's something called PHP, partial hospitalization, which usually lasts for about another month, where they're living the sober living, but they're still receiving 6 to 8 hours of treatment a day. And then that slowly over the course of a few months will drop down to, okay, now just a couple days a week, and then only 3 hours a day, and that type of thing. So I think somebody going through, I mean, this is not a think, it's a fact that people that go through the full continuum and don't skip steps um, have the best chance in remaining in a supportive environment such as a sober living while they're doing that. That's just how it is. You know, you wouldn't if you have cancer, you wouldn't skip um, some of the. I don't want to talk about things I don't know about as much, but
Mm.
I think you all get the point.
But we get it. Right,
Yeah.
right. You just, the whole process is important.
Yeah. Don't skip
Um,
steps.
right. So Lisa says, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I'm very early in this process. My son and daughter both have problems with alcohol and marijuana. My son is in more need at this time and feel that he needs to be away from his normal. What is the process for getting into a recovery program?
Of
So,
course.
and at this point, I'm guessing we're speaking about a program like the Runway, you know,
Yeah,
not just in general.
if it is, for instance, for us, the process is reaching out to me, um, which if again, if it was the runway, the process would be reaching out to me, or if you have another place in mind, reaching out to them. Um, and then typically there's two parts to an admission to I'd say three parts to an admission to any program is one, whether or not the person is willing, and some additional steps that could come if they're not totally willing to go. And then it's typically as easy as for us, for instance, is as simple as insurance verification or financial conversation of what that could look like. And that's different in every case. And then a clinical assessment as well, which is usually a 15 to 30-minute phone call prior to somebody coming in. If somebody is willing to go and those two steps can be managed, then the process to get somebody into treatment, to our treatment, could take 24 hours or less under some circumstances. It can be very quick.
Okay, so of course, Mary asks, what is the cost? And Mary, that would be something that you would discuss with the facility specifically. I don't think that Anthony is qualified to answer that question. So, but we'll get you the information on how to contact his facility and our other sponsors facility if you want to, which is Treehouse.
Mhm.
Brienne says, I am so proud of you. So,
Thank you.
so yeah, she's that. Um, Mary asks how to contact, and we'll get that information to you, Mary. And then Betsy says, as our final question tonight, Betsy says, do you think you could have been successful with recovery if you'd stayed in the same state as your family? My daughter did better when she was in another state. She has a friend enabling her, and we haven't spoken since mid September,
Mm,
and everything she said was a lie.
mm. I think you almost answered the question for yourself there, as you saw her doing the way I understood it, if I heard the question right. You saw her doing better when she was out of state, and you know, we can't, as family, we can't control the entire situation and the people that are around, and there's always going to be the people that are not going to be the best influences. Although I will say those influences can be found anywhere too. But this is where I'll go back and lean on the part of it that was so important for me is when I chose to stay out of state, I wasn't choosing to stay out of state permanently. I was choosing to not rush the process and just take it day by day and see what happens. And just that part in itself of just being willing to stay away and not get back to anything and not rush, that's the part that I think is so important. And I think naturally it's much easier to remain in that mindset if you're not home, if you're not where tons of people and much less people that are in recovery, I'm sure. Not to say that family is a great support system, but we can't rely on family once we get to that point. At that point, it's about, you know, doing it ourselves and with our newfound support systems, whether that's an AA group, the treatment center and stuff. And it becomes a lot easier to go back to old habits, good and bad, when we're home. Hope that makes
I,
sense.
I think that idea of a support system, you know, I say this all the time. As mom, I thought I was it. I mean, I'm mom. I got all the
Yeah.
answers, right? I mean, just listen to me, and this is going to
Mhm.
go well.
Yeah.
And I think we get caught up in that. As mom, we get so desperate in believing that this is my child, and I have to,
Yeah.
and I know how if they would just. But I think there's a bigger picture that we sometimes forget, and that is that
Mm,
extended support system, sober friends, and sponsors and therapists and counselors and all of those
mhm.
people. Um, okay,
Can I say something about that real quick?
sure, sure.
Um, yeah, so I, because I have this conversation, a lot of people, when I specifically when I feel that their family is great support and very positive. And this will have to do sometimes with people wanting to have contact with family during treatment. And while here, like at the Runway, for instance, we do allow family contact, but we limit it as much as possible. And that's not, sometimes people say, oh, okay, I can't have my phone or I can't make calls, so I don't call negative people. I'm like, no, I don't want you to call positive people either. The reason I want you to call positive people either is because if you have, let's say we're about building up, big fat tool belts with all the tools that you can use. And if mom is a great tool to use, to use that analogy and is a great support, then that's good and great. And mom's not going anywhere. Mom's not, and that's, I think, the flip side of this is for the moms and the family to recognize that part too, is if you're not right there solving the problem, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be there in the long term, but you're giving the addict, you're giving the person in that space the ability to put some more tools in their tool belt. And then you can be there afterwards. You're not going anywhere, you know? That's how I look at that. You know,
And learning for themselves how to solve their own problems without
exactly.
me jumping in to do it. So Penny says, and we got a couple more here. Penny says, you just mentioned if the addict is not willing. Can you talk a minute on what happens if the addict isn't willing?
Yeah, depending on the degree to which they're not willing, there's multiple options. I've talked to people myself that family said were not willing, and through a couple phone calls, I've been able to help them come to that place if they're willing to have a phone call with me. Now, if it's not there yet, then there are outside services such as everybody's heard the term interventionist, and It doesn't necessarily need to be a full blown what you would think of if you've seen the TV show or anything. But there's people that we work with that are very close to us here that specialize in working with families, preparing families to be able to start maybe setting more boundaries or having those tough conversations, and sometimes just um, allow people will hire these groups of people to help them remove themselves from the situation. So now, hey, if you want to talk to your family, you got to talk to me first, and that can sound kind of rough, and that's different situations. But there's people that we know very well that are very good at that have a lot of success that can help with that part of the process if somebody isn't quite willing to get help.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Karen says, does your organization work with expanding programs like this to encourage acceptance of state or other non-private insurance options? I think that would be a call for, calling intake and asking what gets taken. I don't know that Anthony's,
Yeah,
is that your
I
wheelhouse,
can.
Anthony?
Yes and no. I do like to avoid the specifics on those types of questions in group situations just because
Right,
I don't want to say something specific and then be wrong. Or sometimes
right.
people, I mean, yeah, it'd be better to ask me directly and give me the specifics.
Uh, okay, and let's see. Kim says, thank you for this. In reference to no contact, this is important for us moms to realize that we sometimes should step out. um, and Deb, as a final, this is the last one. Deb says, my son has always been very resistant to whole religious, spiritual aspect of
Mhm.
recovery. Is it possible to become sober without that? Or is it something that just naturally happens? Are we talking about the religious aspect? I'm guessing, Deb, the finding God, I would guess.
Yeah. So I love that topic, and it's such a hard thing to to even put my finger on. I mean, I had a religious background and upbringing, which was very loose, but I went to church. My grandparents to Catholic church, and with other family members to non-denominational Christian churches. And I, like a lot of people in active addiction and then even early recovery, I had these big resentments towards God that I thought I had. And one of the things that I got some help with learning was my resentments towards God were resentments towards religion and religious institutions specifically. So even in the 12 steps like AA for instance, I mean there's a reason they use the term higher power in there, not God, and it's because so many people conflate God with a religion, and a religion that in that person's mind is the one that they have a resentment towards usually. I do think the higher power piece is essential, but I think it doesn't need to be this, okay, it doesn't need to come with full understanding and commitment from day one. I think it's something that truly, I mean, spirituality is something that grows. It's not just there. Um, and I see people take so many different paths to that. Some get really committed to going to church and a real, traditional view of God. Some people view it as a higher power in very different senses. And I don't see any correlation between, people that have success go to church. I don't see that. But everybody that I see that has success has some conception of a power greater than themselves. And at the same time, though, all those people found that and developed that and nurtured that at different points in their recovery or different points in their life. I don't, you know, for me, I found it to some degree a couple months in, but I don't think I really found it until 4 or 5 years in. So it's different for everybody, but you need to know
Right.
that people need to know that they're not in it by themselves and they can't fix this on their own. That's, I think, the root
I
of
think
it.
that's probably the higher power is that I'm just
Yeah.
not I'm not alone.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Anthony. We appreciate you coming tonight and sharing your story with us. It was amazing, and congratulations to you. What an incredible story. You've
Thank you.
been through it. Yeah. So,
I'm
and
happy
thank
to be
everyone
here.
else for coming. We
Thank
appreciate
you,
you showing
Anthony.
up for this.
We
And,
appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks.
Happy to be here.
We'll have to do this again. We'll pick a topic and have you in again and come in.